Okay, yeah. So, hello, welcome to my podcast. I'm your host, Larry Liu, and today I'm joined by Irma Bailey. She's a current PhD student in the Morgan State University PhD program on applied sociology and social justice. So, why don't you introduce yourself about how did you come to this program and your upbringing and so forth?
Okay, so I'm actually happy to be here. As you shared, I am a first year student within the PhD program in applied sociology and social justice. And why I came into this interest, it's because I've been working within the education system within Trinidad and Tobago. So I am an international student. Um, and working within the education system for just about uh, over 10 years. I would within the ground on the ground working with students as well as at the administrative level. And then I moved on to more of a national level of support, still within children and safeguarding children and what are children's needs to ensure that they develop healthy and can, experience a sustainable future. And so one of the things that I recognized was that education in itself was creating limitations for particular children. And within the area of psychology, it's more very individualistic. You're looking at those personal strengths and how can you get it to work for that child. But when you realize that there are some barriers that are social, you want to investigate that a little bit more. And so in looking at how do I disrupt some of those social barriers that I identified, I came across, this program. And so within this program, I've been exposed to so many theories and so many unique situations, especially within the American context, that has widened my social imagination and helped me to kind of look at positionality and how it impacts, persons within my region, which is the Caribbean. So that's where I am.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned the importance of education for the development of children in the Caribbeans. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about how you came into the education field. Yeah.
So for me, it was more serendipitous. And why I say that is because a lot of what I would have studied would have been, the support of mentors and such. My hope was to be a lawyer. And the reason for that was because, again, it goes back to positionality. I grew up in one of the lower socioeconomic communities within Trinidad and Tobago, very under-resourced primary schools. A lot of us, I recall one of my teachers then saying that they don't really expect much of us. They just need us to go through, and that sparked in me that desire to, get some level of redress for persons who are living in these communities. Can we, change our trajectory? What do we need to change our trajectory? And I recall one of my religious leaders would have ushered me into psychology. And I worked in that area. I fell in love with that area for quite some time. But then I realized that, yeah, it wasn't serving the purpose. So the ultimate goal is to understand what are the barriers, especially for that minority group. And so that's how I got into education. I studied education psychology at the master's level, specifically looking at assessments, psychoeducational assessments, and psychological assessments. And that in itself was, used in education to look at the individual, what is their contribution to their barriers to learning. And I found that that was not enough. It wasn't the explanation that it gave wasn't sufficient to deconstruct that barrier. And so I moved on to sociology.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that education psychology experience. I mean, like, was there anything that you learned while you were doing that?
Yeah. So I first started, well, my master's is in education psychology, and I worked within the student support services division. There I worked as the behavioral specialist. So within Trinidad and Tobago, student support is utilizing a multidisciplinary team of personnel. So we have special educators, we have guidance and counseling, we also have social work, and then psychologists. And we function at a tier level where, there's universal intervention and then there's specialized intervention. So the psychologist provided that level of specialized intervention when students were not, they're not responding to the intervention at a universal level. And I function as a behavioral specialist, giving support to students who were involved in several infractions at the school level and require that level of support to reintegrate as a result of either suspension or being prepared for expulsion. That grouping I often recognize came from the lower socioeconomic communities.
So what would be the issues there? There would be arguments between the students and the teachers,
Yes,
or
so significant violent behaviors, um, absenteeism, truancy, those things were very prominent among this particular group, often demarcated by gender. So you would see a lot more males within that particular grouping. But as I found that there was increasing in the females as well. So obviously something within these communities were creating these types of behaviors, along with all, personal values and such. But there's something that was sort of perpetuating those behaviors. And so we needed to look into that. I moved on from being the behavioral specialist. I spent 6 years as a behavioral specialist. I moved on to being a school psychologist. Um, I would say that I didn't perform in the role of school psychologist. I received the contract of school psychologist, but then I piloted the coordinator of the psychology unit for just about 5 years. So I was responsible for coordinating the psychology program within student support for the education system. And under my garment was how the support is offered by clinical psychologists, school psychologists, and behavioral specialists. So I did that for 5 years. And funny enough, it happened during the time of COVID. So that in itself was quite an adjustment, learning how to support students within the virtual setting. And we had the opportunity to do research at that time, promoting mental health in education and how resilient are students. And phenomenally, we recognize that students are extremely resilient. The structures that they're in creates barriers to them. Um, and yeah, so I did that for 5 years, and then I went on to the Office of the Prime Minister, where I coordinated the national child policy. So everything to do with child and the best interests of the child. That was my role in coordinating programs, build, augmenting support systems, and I did that for a year, and then I switched to sociology coming here.
yeah. So you mentioned the importance of COVID being a very disruptive experience. I
Yeah.
think most of us that went through it regarded it as being quite disruptive for the learning environment. I've heard anecdotally that many educators are complaining that the students especially the younger students that went through the COVID phase, um, never really picked up on, you could say, social,
Mhm.
skills, or they missed out on that social experience. So, yeah, what's been your observation? I mean, from your vantage
Yeah.
point?
So I've seen while within the education system, we've seen that there was a pivotal shift in the age in which behavioral challenges started, the onset for it, with especially within the secondary schools. So whereas you used to see students in like grade, well, standard, we use standard back home, standard three, which is equivalent to, I believe, grade nine here, you would have usually seen behavior or very negative behaviors being displayed at that level. Um, After COVID and that sort of, reintegration back into the physical school community, we saw that it started happening at a very intense volume at Form 1, which is like I would say grade 6 here. And so what we realized that there was a lot of social disruptions to how students interacted with each other, but not just interacting with each other. We saw that there was limited respect for rules and that just that general interaction with adults. We saw a shift coming at a very earlier age than previous.
I see. And th that is a major challenge. And I mean, from the I guess educator perspective, I mean, or the administrator perspective, I mean, was it just like was there an effective response that you believe that the school administration has taken or could have taken? I mean, yeah, what's your understanding of
So
it?
I think it's very complex as it relates to having that intervention that proves to be successful in that regard. And why I think it's complex, it's because many of the interventions that I used require time for you to be able to, determine its effectiveness, especially when you want to change behavior, when you want to improve cognition, so it takes time. And so one of the things that we've realized is that a lot of the intervention it's sparked by political agendas. And with the shift of political leaders within our country, some of the interventions are aborted. And so you don't really get that opportunity to look at how effective an intervention was because it requires that level of time to evaluate. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, and that I think shifts to the policy work, which you have also done on the
Yeah.
National Child Policy. Um, yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about how one makes the shift from school psychology and school administration
Mhm.
to government administration. I mean,
Uh, and again, I would say that my work in itself and how I've been positioned in places have been guided by mentors. What I did recognize was that my role within the education system was extremely limited. It's a stratified system in which, um, in one sense, it's closed as it relates to social mobility. It's closed. Within the education system, we have a meritocracy of public servants versus contract workers. And contract workers don't have the opportunity to rise to the executive level, whereas the public service workers, they do have the opportunity, but at the top level, it's the vacancies are very limited. So you have to wait until persons retire to actually get into those positions. So it was extremely limited. And so I had to look at where can I expand my service. And I saw the opportunity to go on to the government role, again, within a contract situation. And that's how I transitioned.
I see. And I assume that, but even as a contractor, I mean, this is a more lucrative position than, staying within the school administration or school system.
It certainly was, but as I shared with political agendas, these things shift. So within the national level, a lot of the programs within the national child policy was not able to be actualized. And I spent 1 year in the position. The position still remains vacant to this day because of shifts in political leaders within the country. Um, Executing those interventions have been stymied by the agendas of different political leaders. So the role in itself was more at the behest of whichever, leader was there at that time.
During your time there in the government and the Prime Minister's office, I mean, what was your impression of the, priorities on, national child policy? I mean, do you think that, you felt supported in what you were trying to accomplish?
I think at that time we were closing off our political era with we have many political parties within the Westminster system. However, we were just closing off one political leader. And so at that time, it was more focused on evaluating different programs that existed before. The National Child Policy was developed, through a collaboration with UNICEF. And a lot of the programs that were looked at as prescriptive for the issues that were brought forward were not able to be actualized at the time that I was there. Um, Within that year, we did do a lot of work in sensitization towards child safeguarding, a lot of work towards the education system as well, looking at mental health within the education system. I think key areas that were not really fully observed was behavior change strategy that was purported within the agenda. At a national level, we want persons to understand that children are the future, and how do we prepare them to have a sustainable future. That is something that I don't think we had enough time to accomplish because of the transition between governments.
Right. So you mentioned social behavioral changes that the government tries to implement. And I guess, like, do you operate according to specific targets? Like, for instance, we want to reduce truancy by,
Mhm.
this percent, or, we want to reduce the amount of school suspensions. Um, like, like, are there like fixed targets that the government sets itself?
There are fixed targets, especially within the local ministries. So, for instance, the education policy will have its set targets, and they have their strategic plans yearly.
Mhm.
And that is empirically guided, where you look at what are the issues facing children. For a number of years, the issues facing children were their academic performance, which we have seen a steady decline in performance for about 10 years, where you are recognizing that students are performing worse than their previous their parents at that time. So the I guess the drive was to increase academic success. And so a lot of intervention programs were designed to do that. And the goal is to target academics. Alongside that, we recognize that there's an increase in violent behaviors among children. And so that again there was another program that was designed to um, mediate those things. And of course, again, I always look at the time factor. These programs require time. A habit is something that's easy to form, but very difficult to eliminate. And so the success of those programs, I really can't say. The evaluation needs to happen. assessments need to happen, but for it to be, I guess, something that is of value, you have to have the time to observe the intervention work.
Right. So you mentioned academic performance,
Yeah.
that being quite important, and that would relate to what, I guess, test scores or GPA. I mean, what's the
So we do
definition?
utilize high stake exams. Ours is at the elementary level or primary school level for us. We use the secondary school entrance program exam, and that exam is at the, I guess, grade 5 for here, but it is standard 4 and 5 for back home, where students are, essentially doing one exam that tests skills in literacy, comprehension, math, predominantly, and that takes them on to secondary school. Those exams have demarcated, and this is where I recognize the inequality, because what happens then, they go on to secondary schools, but in secondary schools in itself, there are choices that you can make. There's a first choice, second choice, a third choice. And how are oftentimes the prestige school, everyone wants to go to the prestige schools. That's the stratification of the secondary schools. You have what is considered as good schools, um, because of their performance at another terminal examination, which is the Caribbean, CXE, which has changed to the Caribbean secondary examination. Um, that in itself creates disparities among the secondary schools. You have those schools that are board schools outperforming the government schools. You also have those schools that have a traditional prestige coming from that colonial era that outperforms. And you have to, look at how resourced are these schools. What are the factors that creates that level of success at those levels? It's a constant sort of academic reduction in performance when you look at the government schools, and especially those secondary schools, whether or not they are board schools within the lower socioeconomic communities. So that's where the stratification begins.
Right. Yeah. So, well, you have socioeconomics, that's basically the distinction between the richer and the poorer households. And then secondarily, there's, you could say the academic outcomes, the performance. Um, because I would think that, if you come from a low-income household, that the amount of resources that those families have devoted to, the educational success of the children would be much reduced, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I would imagine like is a such thing as like child labor and like having to, assist, let's say the parents with, economic tasks
Yeah.
and where they cannot focus on school.
Yeah. So I'm pleased to say that we have, as a nation, really improved how we deal with child labor. So there's legislation, there's a body that allows for investigation, and there's rapid response in that regard. So we do not see like high volumes of child labor. But we also recognize that within the rural communities, there's a little interest for the academic side. Children are kept at home to help with the various, either it's farm work or estate work. They are kept at home. And what we have recognized is that through sensitization and through that level of school and home collaboration, that has been reduced, but it's still an issue to be observed.
Right. And yeah, so yeah, that would certainly impact academic performance, I believe. And in terms of the like resources that you mentioned, like the desirable schools, the top schools that parents try to put their children into. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that school stratification
Mhm.
and if I send my kid to the best school versus, a medium school or, a low quality school, I mean, like what is the quality difference actually in terms of, like the teachers or school psychologists or any
So
other thing?
that's the phenomena that has to be really deconstructed. And I think that that's why my research area is looking predominantly at how schools and our education system is replicating that social reproduction. Um, Within Trinidad and Tobago, the school system carries one curricula. We don't have things like chartered schools. So there's no independence to how you apply the curriculum. We do have private schools, and there is some leeway there, but they still maintain the national curriculum. What we have found is that government schools are significantly under-resourced in comparison to some of the board schools, as well as the majority of the private schools. Now, obviously, with private schools, you know that the parents have to be able to afford tuition. So success is paid for, right? At the board schools, what there is that the board in itself, either religious boards. So we do have the Anglican schools, we have the Roman Catholic schools, you also have the Hindu schools and the Muslim schools. And of recent, we saw, schools, the Shelter Baptist or the Baptist faith having schools as well. Within those board schools, you have support from the boards along with government assistance. So you do have those who have board and government assisted schools. Some of them outperform the government schools as well. And that's because, well, one can suppose the resources that are accessible to them. The government schools lag behind in those performance because we do recognize that they are very under-resourced.
Right. And so by under resource, I mean, like, I guess the implication would be like the textbooks that you're able to purchase, the amount of money that you can pay the teachers, also the equipment that is being used, like, a new whiteboard versus an old one. I mean, talk a little bit more about like what are those resource differences?
So within the elite schools, the physical infrastructure still, most of the time, they remain somewhat from their prehistoric colonial buildings. Advancements have looked at, IT resources, lab accessibilities, that level of material, uh, transitions that took place within those schools. The government schools, with again the polarized politics, you would see that new schools are built, but you still have challenges with access to internet. You still have challenges with, um, the, as you said, the physical resources of books. Sometimes it's markers for the teachers to utilize, whiteboard markers. So those are some of the challenges that you will see in the resources. The teachers are paid because it's they're part of the public service and so they're paid, but they actually face a significant limitation with when money is allocated to the school. There is a lag, and because of that, within the school year, they have limited resources to furnish what the students need for learning.
Right. And I would imagine that if you were going to one of these private schools that they would be able to pay higher salaries
Oh
than
yeah.
government schools.
Well, so I mean, I've spoken to some persons who work within the private school system, and they say that they get lower salaries, but there are benefits that are afforded to them, and so within the private institutions, parents pay for those benefits to be afforded to the teachers.
Right. So if I'm, let's say, like a young Trinidadian educator, I go through the schooling. I guess there's some teacher certification
Yes.
program that exists. And do I then have the choice to work for, a government school versus a board school or private school? I mean, like, what are sort of the choice options that
Yeah.
teachers have, and what's most attractive?
Uh, so with teaching within the government institution, one of the greatest benefits that you can have is access to a pension because you're a public servant. And so you have 33 years of guaranteed work, and then you can retire with a pension. Within the private institution, that does not exist. You work on a contract level based on the organization's design. Within the board schools, you can work, as a government. Well, you have to register. You must be registered as a teacher within Trinidad and Tobago. You get a registration number, and that allows you to work in any one of the types of schools that we have. So you have the government schools, you have the board schools, but every teacher should be registered according to our Education Act.
Right. So I mean, but it sounds then like the most attractive option as a young teacher is to be part of the government school, actually. Um, but you're saying that that's also the area where there's more socioeconomic inequality, where there are more challenges for students from lower income households to I suppose thrive. Um, yeah, I mean yeah, I mean is that sort of yeah, I mean is it kind of a little bit of a tension there? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like okay, you have a desirable government school, but then from the pupil side, from the student side, that might be the less
There's also
desirable.
another area to consider there because, as I shared, it's a meritocracy in one sense. So unless teachers move up to either principalship, there's no vacancy. And so you have to wait until vacancies open up for you to be brought in as a government teacher. So you, after completion of your degree for within Trinidad and Tobago, you have to have a first degree in education to register for your teacher's number. And so after completing that, you have your teacher's number, but you're on a waiting list. Um, Persons have been on waiting lists for more than 15 years
Mhm.
before they're called, so you literally have to wait until that vacancy opens up.
In the meantime, you work for like basically any school that hires you.
That's right.
This would be the private
That's right.
schools. Yeah. Yeah, and then in terms of like teacher training. It sounds like the way how you explained it. I mean, if there's like a standardized teacher certification
Yeah.
system, so there's a fixed amount of knowledge that you need to have as an English instructor or math instructor and so
Yeah.
forth. So then, uh, like, would it be, I guess, harder to, access certain um, teaching positions, between these, three types of schools. Um, I guess you mentioned that like the government schools, it would be harder to
Yeah.
obtain.
So vacancies is certainly the area that is the challenge. Um, Within the private institutions, there may be a lot more opportunities. But often people speak about the lower salary as well as not having a pension um, after working for how many of a years. But I think that along with the education, the standard education training. Within the Ministry of Education, there is a department that is designed to ensure that professional development happens for teachers. So you have the teacher education department. And so a lot of training happens. Some of them are voluntary, which allows you to build your capacity, and then some of them are mandatory. What we saw during the COVID, and I had the opportunity to work along with that department significantly during the COVID time, was that a lot of deficits, we found that teachers had a lot of deficits in, ICT and transitioning from that chalk and talk to utilizing more technology within the classroom. And so a lot of emphasis was placed on helping teachers to develop those skills through that department. With the psychologist coming on board, because the psychologist came on board in 2014. What we recognized also is that learning disabilities and learning disorders was something that a lot of teachers needed support in identifying or what are key indicators, and also how to work along to ensure that those students who are identified or even suspected get the best support within the classroom. A lot of the transformation policies that we have been working with within Trinidad and Tobago has a lot to do with inclusion. Um, Recognizing that at this time within the global community, inclusion and diversity, understanding neurodiversity is very critical.
Yeah, yeah, you mentioned the ICT, information communication technologies. Yeah, I mean, how has that landscape of education technology evolved in Trinidad and Tobago? I mean, over time, um, yeah, and also like what does the research suggest
Mhm.
about how effective ICT is in improving educational outcomes? Because my impression was that we like certainly in the US, I mean, we add more and more technology, ed tech, but we're not really like increasing academic performance
Yeah.
that much. But I don't know whether that's different on the islands.
So within the Caribbean in itself, ICT development was slower than most part of the world, but it certainly has its transition taking place. Uh, Within Trinidad and Tobago context, we saw a extreme rapid shift during the COVID period, where you just had to embrace technology. You had to your entire classroom was in the virtual world. Grading systems, all of those things had to transition at a rapid pace. And that was like about a 2 year period where we just shifted. The digital environment within our education system has been steadily moving forward since then. Up until last week, I think that there was some significant developments in that regard where we're using AI technology within the classroom now. So those are major accomplishments within the ICT world and education. As it relates to the data supporting whether or not it's effective for academic success, we are seeing this, it's a parallel, because in one sense you are seeing cognitive decline, but it comes as a result of how it's used. And so I think that that is the critical thing to identify. The mass accumulation of ICT technology within, or technology in itself within the education system is good. We're in a technological age, right? And so you have to prepare your future generation to be able to utilize what within the environment that they're in. How it's used and how it's done is completely I think that that's where we need to investigate. So I looked at some data coming out of Sweden where they recognize that that sole reliance on ICT has not been beneficial to the Swedish public. And so they have reverted to having books, hard copy books within the classroom. They haven't done away with ICT development. They're just using it in a different way as augmenting to the physical books. We recognize that students their cognitive abilities have significantly declined because their reliance is on AI and such. And those are things that has to be addressed, right? It's how it's used. Within particular schools, like within the prestige schools, you have persons who are trained and can help students to use the technology in the most efficient way, that there is no decline in your cognitive development, but it is aiding with the cognitive development. Within the government schools, you may not have that level of support, and that's something that has to be evaluated as well.
Yeah, I guess it raises the question of like, you know, whether there is a guidebook for educators, at all levels of, K to 12 to or even the higher education, like, do we have an effective manual that we can share with the other educators regarding, as you mentioned, the effective usage of AI and, how we can use the tool as an enhancement rather than as a, displacement for, critical thinking. Um, I mean, like for instance, I mean, like my assumption at this point is that most students will be using, AI, I mean, for their assignments. Um, and therefore, I think, you like I see the ability of the students to learn
Mhm.
based on like presentations, like, in-person assignments. Like if I hear the students speak and, like what kind of words and terminology are they using? Are they, reading off from the slide, or are
Yeah.
they kind of using their own words to kind of interpret, the facts and the concepts? Um, yeah, and the Swedish example that you raise suggests, the kind of um, like in a world of ICT. I mean, it seems like that the low-tech solution seems to be the one that really shows and demonstrates that the students are actively learning.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, how do you think about this? I mean, can we provide a manual to educators?
The In my understanding of this global shift in technology, it's happening so fast. Creating a manual with its evolving tech, I think that that in itself would be problematic. But one of the things that educators have to understand is, within this time period, how is it impacting our students? What are the goals that we have for our students? And how can the digital structure that we have enhance our processes to achieve that goal? I think that that has to be evaluated with any intervention, or in if you're introducing new technology within the school climate. You have to understand what is your goal and how does it impact the processes that you're using to get to the goal.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, so it's still a major area to be explored. I mean,
Definitely.
like how can we integrate ICT in the most responsible way? I mean, um, the thing is that, to some extent, I mean, there is, you could say, a high, profit expectation, certainly among those, ICT companies, edtech companies. They benefit for sure if they can convince educators that, using their tech product is kind of the best thing. Um, but but then as for, the teachers themselves, I mean, like I feel like, I mean, they have to assess themselves, like,
That's right.
how whether they want to adopt it or not, right?
And there has been resistance, especially during the COVID time, when you looked at how many teachers were willing to do that shift, were willing to do that transition. Some persons are just traditional. And there is a lot of the conspiracy theories on, ICT and how fast it's developing, that level of ignorance to what it can and cannot do. So that exists. How do especially small and developing countries such as within the Trinidad and Tobago context, how do help your citizens to recognize it as an a sort of augmented approach to what has traditionally been done? Are we doing away with what is traditionally proven to be successful, or are we utilizing it to enhance it? And I think that that is a critical part of what is the responsibility of the education, system within Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by extension. We definitely have to recognize that learning and development is something that is we are seeing transformation, but is it for the best? Are our students developing cognitively, or are they able to now regurgitate what AI has been doing? And that is something I guess, I haven't looked into the research, but I think it's an area for us to look at whether or not we are developing cognitively, or we are becoming essentially programmed by the AIs.
Yeah. Now, what's been the, official government approach regarding AI? I mean, in Trinidad, I mean, are they saying, well, I mean, those big tech companies in the US, they're developing it, and we
Mhm.
have to join the bandwagon, or otherwise our kids are going to be left behind? I mean, or is there also maybe some of the critical voices there? I mean, what's kind of the official policy there?
Again, after COVID and that rapid introduction of, technology into the system, the nation has moved ahead with its digital transformation. So all ministries are embracing that technology and its capabilities. Within the education system, we are also seeing a significant integration of AI. And as I shared just last week, they launched a program. I haven't gone deeply into the program yet, but I know it's allowing students to get access to books, and the different types of the capacity to which it'll be engaging with AI. I don't know as yet. But is there resistance at the government level? I don't see that. And is there resistance on the ground level from the teachers? They haven't shared it outwardly yet. It is something to look to see how it's being received.
Yeah, I mean, just to say maybe one positive thing about AI and technology. I mean, I was reading a paper about like the positive learning impact, certainly for neurodivergent individuals. There was an experiment that they did with autistic kids or those on the autism spectrum disorder. Um, which basically means that they have issues like communicating
Yes.
with others, with strangers, and for those individuals, for those kids, if they can sort of use a an AI avatar or some computer screen or laptop, tablet, if that helps them engage more with their environment and more with like grasping and learning concepts, um, then it seems to me to be better than like the status quo, which would be if
Yeah,
there was no technology and they're just not willing to mix with classmates and teachers. So yeah, I mean, like, like, do you agree with that? I mean, like, are there specific benefits with AI in education?
definitely there are benefits. It would add to the quadrant of assistive learning, approaches for persons who are within that neurodivergent category. How it's used again and the consistency. You know, we recognize that AI in itself is becoming its own industry, capitalistic industry. So that level of funding that is going to be needed to ensure that that is a stable function within the education system is something that has to be observed. Whether or not the Caribbean in itself, their economic development is able to ensure that these systems are readily available at a consistent rate is something that has to be identified, because that will determine how beneficial it is. When you bring a model that works for a child and then you take it away, can you have it consistently across all levels of education, that that child receives the support from early childhood all the way up to secondary or and tertiary level? Is that available? And again, it points to the disparities that communities will face, because students who are the lower socioeconomic community may not be able to have those same features, those same assistive approaches within their community, So it is something to explore from a holistic perspective.
Yeah, and then if I may say something 180 degrees against something negative about technology, I saw that so you brought up the Swedish example. I wasn't aware of that, but I know in Australia, for instance, they were one of the early countries who I think at the beginning of this year they banned social media for I think under 16.
Yes.
And that was based on a lot of the childhood psychology research that was done on basically, yeah, I mean, screen addiction among the students. And I saw that after the ban, there seems to have been an increase in the amount of library books that
Mhm.
the students, that the kids have checked out. Um, which to me is, somebody, I mean, who, grew up in, you could say, a public library system and having benefited from it, seems to be like a very good, very positive development. Um, yeah, do you have a position on like, social media ban? I mean, would that have educational
Access
outcomes?
to social media has had several benefits as well as disadvantages to it. One of the things that we recognize is that suicide rates have increased as a result of being within that digital community. A lot more isolation is happening with students. A lot of uh, being bombarded with information at such a rapid rate is really, affecting how students engage with their physical community. Um, Again, it comes to how do we support them in that. Is eliminating it the best option? I would say no, not at this phase in life. At one point, you had pen pals. You would write letters to persons in different countries, and you will have that relationship. The technological advancement have allowed for you to now have these real-time conversations, and that's certainly a benefit. It's how it's supervised, how it's utilized. That's the critical area that we need to develop. It can't be something that you introduce to your community without the safeguarding, because we recognize that not it doesn't bring just the benefits, it brings the disadvantages with it.
Yeah, yeah. So no blanket ban on social media. I mean, I've sort of mixed view on this. I mean, I wrote a blog post about this, and I found it to be, quite a positive idea. I mean, to ban the social media. I mean, because you always have this sort of collective action problem if you say, we let individual students, young people figure out whether they want to use it or not. We want to let the parents decide whether the kids use it or not. But then you can see where the problem is, like, because if let's say only a small number of parents and students are willing to forego the social media, then there's going to be enough others that will be like, hey, look at this amazing thing that I've got here, and then the students kind of the remaining students feel left out. Um, so versus, I mean, if let's say you enforce everybody to surrender their technology device, at the beginning of the school day, and then you can pick it up at the end again. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems like th there would be,
Yeah.
a net benefit
It certainly
to
would
students.
increase that level of peer-to-peer interaction, build communication, something that we're seeing that is lacking among students.
Yeah, going on a playground, right? Just
Yes,
playing. Yeah.
uh, what I've done this my sort of private social experiment, just looking at teenagers, children on the bus, on the trains, and you recognize that you're sitting next to your peer, but there's limited conversation because, and even if there's conversation, you are still conversing while your attention is deflected. In one sense, it's directed within your phone. So I recognize that, that exposure to social media has its own limitations. There's so much research out there to show that it is a dopamine enhancer, right? It literally shoots up dopamine, which also has its addictive possibilities. So we're not disputing that. Again, it is how much you allow and how much it's supervised and how you train that level of responsible behavior so that persons could utilize it in the best way. If we're looking at it, especially within the education system, we are preparing students for for globalization. That's what has happened. We are in a global economy, and so we want our students to be engaged with the different cultures. We want them because it informs critical thinking, right? Technology has allowed that open access, but too much at an early age when you're not prepared, it can be detrimental. So it's the structures that we put in place to guide that.
Yeah, yeah. I think we'll have to, see it being tested out. I mean, but I do know that like why, especially parents of young children, like why they want the kids to be exposed to the screen. I think it's mostly a matter of like that, like the kids would otherwise be running around and they would cause chaos and
Disruption.
disruption. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, and if they look at the tablet, if they look at the screen,
Mm-hmm.
then it sort of, keeps them occupied in some
Yeah.
way, and then, the parents can then focus more on like what they want to do during the
Yeah,
day, tasks in the day. But it does seem to come at a cost.
it does.
And certainly, I mean, for those of us who, as educators, I mean, we're very interested in like, getting the students to learn and be open-minded with ideas. Um, I mean, I can tell for sure. I mean, among our undergraduate students, I mean, there's frustration. I mean, if,
Yeah.
half the students look down at the phone and, while you're trying to,
Yeah.
deliver your material, right?
Not only that, the practice of scrolling in itself has trained your mind to shift your attention rapidly. And so, whereas as an educator, you want to be able to, create associations and you want your brain to retrieve information from before, building those schemas, as an educator, that's what your job is. But technology and the consistent use of it, especially within the schooling, has limited the capacity for students to be able to do that. So we are seeing a cognitive decline. Um, can schools address this? Certainly, it has been done, right? But it has to be a partnership. And again, I go back to that sense of national behavioral change strategy where you introduce something, but nationally it's not you're not supporting everyone's understanding of it. You're not creating the framework so that everyone can be able to support it in its best way. That's important as well.
Okay, so one last question, and that's maybe again going back to the policy level at the highest level. I
Mhm.
mean, if there was sort of like, two or three big issues regarding, child development, or child psychology, or education system. I mean, what are sort of like the high priority items that you think that must be addressed at the policy level?
At a policy level, we recognize that within the social framework of our country, there's a lot of issues. High unemployment, leads to significant social issues within the very fabric of communities, even within the homes. So we have high domestic violence, we have all of this. Those things impact children and it impacts learning, it impacts development. So definitely that has to be something that is addressed. How do we get our citizens to be able to have that level of economic stability? That is something that cannot be denied. And it is not as a easy fix. It's very complex, especially within our global economic state right now. But that is something that cannot be ignored. Another thing would be the level of violence within communities. I always say that schools are a microcosm of the wider community. Schools are becoming extremely violent because our communities are extremely violent. How do we engage with or mitigate that level of violence is something that we have to investigate. We have to also test interventions. A lot of the times, we just bring these policies that are not tested within the cultural context of the Caribbean. We have to test these things and give it the time to matriculate into outcomes. We have to test it. That is something that I believe has to be a first priority for us because we are losing a lot of our youths. We are losing them to gun violence. And so I see that as something that is critical. I also see the area of special needs and that level of support. That is something that we 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 utilize and make visible based on politics, but these are real lives. These are lives within our communities. These are lives that are going to be within our future as well. And how do we help them to navigate it successfully is critical. Do we build structures for them? And can those structures that we build be sustained? Because when we utilize things like international funding, we have these programs, we launch it publicly, politicizing it, but then within 2 years it flops, right? These are lives, these are children, these are our future. And so how do we ensure that those things are sustained is something that is critical for our development as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And everything kind of fitting together, right? I mean, certainly, I mean, if you want to reduce the amount of violence, then you have to provide some amount of economic development, where maybe a life of crime might be, less attractive or less
Right.
necessary. And yeah, and I guess the education system maybe is only one pillar, it seems like. I mean,
Yeah.
so if you have a all of government approach, I mean, it suggests that you have to move multiple levers at the same time. So
Yes.
within the criminal justice system, within the economic development office.
Definitely within Trinidad and Tobago, you have seen that shift. There's legislation development to support those things. However, the implementation seems to lag behind. So the paperwork is there, the structure is there. It's just the implementation that we have to see rapidly catching up. And I think that that's important for us to look at as well.
That's for sure. Okay, well, thank you very much, Emma, for coming in. These are the questions I've had, and I'm sure we can do this again at a later point, especially once um, completed some of the field work, and then you
Yeah.
can maybe, you could say update us and the world around, your findings, your research findings.
Thank you so much for
Sure.
having me.
Okay, sure. And